Hello, everyone. Welcome to our holiday giveaway series with the session today, Human-Centered Design with Salesforce Ben and Skuid. So very nice to meet you all. My name is Ben McCarthy. I'm founder at salesforceben.com and also Chief Revenue Officer at Nimble, an ISV application. So we've already given away a few prizes in our holiday giveaway series that we've partnered with Skuid on. We've given away a year's supply of Bombas socks, some Warby Parker sunglasses, and in this session, we're going to be giving away a whiskey appreciation crate that sounds very nice, and also the gift of a heifer. So if you're unfamiliar with what a heifer is, like I was, it's a cow which is used for farming. So it's going to some families. Heifer International is the company giving heifers to families in need, hoping to end poverty. So the entry has closed for this session. We'll be announcing the winners at the end of the live stream. But if you would like to be entered into our final prize, which is some really fancy Bose wireless headphones, you can head to the link in the description where you can sign up. And although this event with Ken, CEO of Skuid, is going to be amazing, don't miss the last panel event that we've got, where I will be hosting Lucy Mazalon, who is the editor at The Drip, Matt Brown, who is a product manager at Skuid, as well as Steph Herrera, who's founder of Salesforce Saturdays, founder of Pep Up Tech, and Global VP at Computer Futures as well. So that is in a week's time. But without further ado, I'm very happy to be with Ken McElrath, CEO and founder of Skuid. Ken is a serial entrepreneur, design thinker, and author. And if you haven't heard of Skuid before, they provide a toolkit to accelerate custom Salesforce app design, development, and adoption. I've personally been involved in a few projects with Skuid. The one that I was involved in was with a SaaS business that completely turned Salesforce and optimized it for selling software as a service. It's a very cool project. And the ability to completely customize the Salesforce interface using low code and Lightning native tools is very impressive. But today we're going to be talking about human-centered design. And from personal experience working with hundreds of Salesforce projects, design is often factored in somewhat to an implementation, but it also gets pushed down the list in favor of other system attributes. And I think this is probably because Salesforce looks pretty good, right, as it is. But design can affect a lot of things and can affect the success of a project. It can affect usability, efficiency, and probably most importantly, adoption as well. So I'm very excited to hear more from Ken. So Ken, can you give us an overview about what human-centered design is and what it has to do with application development?
Sure. Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thanks, Ben, for having me on and appreciate the opportunity. So human-centered design is essentially a way to turn how we solve problems. And I define problem relatively loosely. It could be a business problem. It could be a life problem, right? But specifically related to software, it's solving software problems from a different perspective, what I like to call an upside down perspective. Most of the time in my past career, and I've been in the technology industry, really working in building applications for over 30 years now, many people approach problems from the perspective of what we like to call feasibility. The feasibility means, can the technology solve a particular problem that we're trying to solve? And but there's two other aspects that are involved in human-centered design, and the two other aspects are viability and desirability. So viability is pretty obvious. It's, can we afford it, right? And maybe it's feasible to build this solution with a particular technology, but can we actually afford to build it with that particular technology? But there's this other aspect called desirability that often doesn't enter into the picture until much too late in the process. Desirability is starting with the users. And so if you think about a traditional problem-solving endeavor with technology, what happens is the business has a major issue and they say, we need to solve this problem. So the first thing they typically do is they go to the technology and say, is there a technology that solves this problem? Is it feasible for us to solve this problem? And then they maybe go out and buy the technology, or they build the technology, and then they take it to the users and say, okay, here's our solution to the problem, go, right? And the users look at it and say, I don't get it. This doesn't match what we actually need to get the job done. And as a result, most applications, particularly enterprise software applications, end up not getting used, or they end up with trying to incentivize users to actually log in and use the application, or maybe sometimes use a very big stick to get them to use the applications. And what human-centered design does is flips that on its head and says, you know what, let's start from a different place. Let's start with the users and say, let's look at how they're trying to solve this problem today. And you look at ways that they're really working around the technology that is currently in place, or the solution that's currently in place. And you say, why are you doing it that way? And if you could do it in the best conceivable way possible, what would that look like? And when you start with those users and say, what is most desirable for you in order to get your work done much more quickly and much more efficiently, what would that look like? And then what you do is you take those users' needs, felt needs, real needs, and you overlay that with the business needs and the technology that's available. And you say, is there a way that we can get as much overlap between viability, feasibility, and desirability, so that when the users are delivered a solution at the end of the day, the business gets what they want. The technology is, we can do it for a reasonable cost, in fact, much more reasonable. And then when we release this application to the users are like, this is exactly what we need. And adoption is no longer an issue. They just want the application because it helps them get their job done much more quickly and efficiently.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ken. I think I can relate back to that a lot, because I think it's kind of consulting 101 when you walk into a first meeting and you've got a manager that's saying, we want to build a system that does X. And it's kind of getting up the strength of the consultant especially when you're new into it, to go, okay, well, let's park that and let's actually understand what problems you want to solve. So I think that makes so much sense. But if we relate this back to some of the audience that will be listening, and probably a lot of Salesforce admins and people who are building on the Salesforce platform, why should they care about this, and what kind of benefits do they gain to realize by thinking more about human-centered design?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually I've talked to a lot of Salesforce admins about this very issue. And I think number one, it's about job security, right? If you talk to any Salesforce admin, that they're almost always being held accountable to how many people are using the software. Because if you can't get people to use the software, the data quality that comes out of that software is going to be terrible. And if you're spending a lot of money on the backend technology in order to solve this business problem, and the data quality isn't there, and the users aren't actually using the software, you as a Salesforce admin, your job's on the line, because a lot of money is being spent. If the software is not being used, it's a problem. So adoption is critical. If you start with human-centered design, start with the user desirability first, and then work your way back towards the technology, you're going to end up with much higher user adoption numbers. Your data quality is going to improve, and the ROI from this software investment, and frankly, for your job, is going to be very clear to the business.
Cool, thanks. And I think actually this is probably, there's a lot of talk at the moment with Salesforce admins about, because Salesforce admin, a lot of people think it's becoming saturated, the role. There's a lot of admins out there, which is true. I think this is quite a good way to stand out from the crowd, actually focusing on those metrics as success metrics as a Salesforce admin. And human-centered design is clearly clearly a way to do that. So for people listening, what are some components of human-centered design that someone who's just started can apply quite easily? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think that there's an aspect of human-centered design that involves what we call design thinking, which is it's really a process for trying to get to the best available solution as quickly as possible. And you do that through understanding the human needs, looking for those things that I called workarounds earlier on, where that's where the opportunity lies. When you understand how to do really effective user research, and then quickly take that user research and say, let's imagine what the best available solution we could develop today would look like, and then very quickly prototype that solution and get it in front of the users. and get that feedback from the users and then iterate very quickly based on that feedback. And you basically iterate your way to success, right? That's what human-centered design looks like. So it looks a little messy. When you look at how it lays out from a project management perspective, it looks nice and linear with nice clear steps. But really it's a messy process of very quickly making decisions, prototyping, getting in front of users, saying, is this what you want? If the answer is yes, awesome. If it's no, then what do we need to change? And how do we do that very, very quickly? That's what it looks like. At the end, what the result looks like of a process like this is that you get applications that have much greater utility, efficiency, clarity, and delight. And a huge mistake that many people make in developing software, or even just modifying software that they have, is that they focus so much on design as a visual aspect of things versus a process of getting to better utility, efficiency, and clarity, that it doesn't really matter what user interface or design you do on the back end. If it's the utility, efficiency, and clarity, it's like lipstick on a pig, right? You don't want to focus your energy on like things like fonts and colors and spacing and things like that. If you haven't thought first about, is the user going to be able to accomplish their tasks with this application to reach their goals, right? That's what utility is. And for efficiency, is the user going to be able to perform those tasks faster than the available alternative solutions? And on the clarity aspects, is the user able to see very quickly how to use this application? Do they understand how it works without doing any training, without doing any consulting, a user manual, right? If you can do those three things with any application, you are way ahead of anything else that anybody else is going to do. And then you get to the delight aspect, and that's where you start talking about the visual appeal of the application, whether it's actually going to inspire confidence in the tool and the people who built it. So anyway, so it's a complicated process, or kind of a messy looking process of best available solution, prototyping, and then iterating as fast as you can. But ultimately, it's these four things.
Cool. And I really like the point about, because I think, without knowing what design means, people can think at the face of it, it means kind of colors and fonts. And, I think people probably maybe pay attention to that a bit more than some of these other things. Well, from my projects anyway, because it's kind of, you want it to look nice and appealing and, have a nice background image and things like that. But, in terms of efficiency of the application, that might not be paid attention to as much, which I suppose leads, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's in fact, many people think of that, the visual aspect is kind of icing on the cake, when in fact, that design aspect, the visual appeal of it is very much tied to the utility, efficiency, and clarity. As an example, a button is not just a button, right? You need to there's different kinds of buttons. There's constructive buttons, there's destructive buttons like save and cancel, right? Like the save button should always be in the same place. It should always be the same color. It should always be the same font, no matter what applications people are using, right? So we have customers at Skuid, for example, who have over 150 applications that they've built with Skuid, and they're able to apply a design system that is that has the exact same utility across every single application, so that the users don't have to think. They can just intuit where to go in order to get stuff done in the application. And a button is just one small example. So the delight aspect has a lot to do with doing your job on the utility, efficiency, and clarity aspects, because then the design comes in as a support infrastructure, if you will, to reinforce all of those things.
Yeah, very cool. And I suppose, kind of leading on to question, I think from my personal experience, and I think from the industry, design in this type of way, efficiency and getting involved, users involved, sometimes you thought was a nice to have. I'm guessing you would much rather think of it as a must have. But what kind of, I suppose, what do you think about this, and what are the kind of benefits that people can gain to realize by switching their thinking to more of a must have?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that design it will never go away. Even if you spend $0 on it, it's still there. It's just bad design, right? So when you put an application out in front of users, you have to acknowledge that I'm either going to put something in front of them that is badly designed or is well designed. You don't really have a choice. It's one or the other. And so the question is, how much time and energy are you going to put into the design aspect of things in order to make sure that it's going to support adoption of the application? And it's going to support the kind of usage that you need in order to deliver the business results that you're on the hook for.
Yeah. Okay. And what kind of results have you seen with your own customers? Because I'm guessing you've worked with quite a lot of customers to kind of switch their thinking in this respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a variety of different ways to look at that. I mean, from the adoption perspective, we've seen customers who had Salesforce design, like CRM, Sales Cloud adoption of below 50%, go to the high 90s and maintain that over 2 years. And it was specifically because they went through this process of saying, what is the best application from the user's perspective, and worked back towards the data, right? Many companies make the mistake of starting with the data model and saying, we have to build a data model in order to accomplish this, this task. And then what they end up with is a necessarily complex data model that then they have to figure out, oh, wow, how do I design now from the user's perspective? Because it's so difficult to navigate this very complex data model that users are going to get lost, right? And when you start with the users in mind and work back towards the data versus the data towards the user, from the user experience perspective, that's when you're going to get this, awesome design that has utility, efficiency, clarity, and delight. But that's just one example. There are other examples where the only way that it was possible to deliver a well-designed application was to use our product, Skuid, to get there, because they had tried for 2 years to build an application from the database forward, and they now knew that they had a rock solid data structure. They couldn't get rid of it. They didn't want to get rid of it. They had to keep it, but now they had to figure out how to move from the user backwards, and they jumped in with Skuid, and they were able to do that very, very quickly, whereas they couldn't do it otherwise. Even writing code, they couldn't do it. So I'm not trying to do a commercial for Skuid, but those customers, it was basically either we have an application that people can use or we don't. They didn't have any other option other than to use Skuid to get to the application that they needed.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm interested because one of the complaints I think I hear quite a lot from some companies when they're in a kind of high volume sales kind of cold calling role or something like that, I think one of the biggest complaints I hear is that Salesforce is too cumbersome. It's too many clicks, when you're working with the lead object or something like that. Is that quite a big kind of point of topic when it comes to overlaying your applications on the Salesforce platform? Is there any ones which are kind of bigger than that?
Absolutely. So Salesforce is an awesome platform for building the necessarily complex data models that these companies need, whether it's in the public sector or financial services or technology, wherever. The data models that people need to build to track all the data are necessarily complex. And what we've been able to see happen is companies who are using like hundreds of clicks to get a task done, reduce those to exponentially smaller amounts of clicks. We had one entity, it was a public sector company that went from like 75 clicks in an application to 4 using Skuid. And it's not because they didn't simplify their data model at all. It's still complex, but they were able to do stuff with those 4 clicks that was initiating stuff behind the scenes in that data model to automatically do a whole bunch of stuff that the user didn't have to do by navigating a whole bunch of different screens. And that's something that we've seen over and over and over again, is 75 clicks down to less than 10, hundreds of clicks down to, tens of clicks. It's phenomenal how much you can reduce those clicks with a good user experience that's designed from the user back towards the data instead of the other way around.
And that's, I think you mentioned automation there. So is that not just changing the kind of the visual user experience, but also the back end and what's going on behalf of the user?
Right. It's all connected. It's the front end visual experience is a big piece of it, but also there's logic that occurs in the front end. So for instance, if you're moving from one step in a wizard to the next step, that the first step may have been collecting data that resides in 3 different data objects, right? You need to have something going on in the background so when you click next, it's validating that the data is entered, and then it's actually saving that out into those different objects before you move on to the next step. And that's either a lot of code, or it's doing something very point and click with Skuid to automate that and make that happen. And that's why we're able to save so many clicks, because we just automate so much in the back end. So it's the upfront user interface layer, but it's also the logic layer behind the scenes and the data behind the scenes. All 3 of those areas are covered by Skuid within one toolkit. And that's what makes it so quick to iterate after you push the prototype out to somebody and say, okay, is this what you want? No, okay, we'll change that really quick and push it out again. Oh, we'll change it again, push that again. It basically makes it possible to do that full design thinking process, and it makes human-centered design possible, no matter how complicated your backend is.
Nice. So where did you personally first hear about human-centered design, and where would you, are there any resources that you would recommend people to go towards if they're...
Yeah, actually, where I heard it named, which is different than actually knowing about it. So I did human-centered design earlier in my career. I just didn't know what the name of it was, right? But eventually I ran into a company called IDEO that originally was formed out in Palo Alto. They designed the first mouse for Apple. That's probably how they got it.
Very cool.
But IDEO has become a design consultancy that is internationally renowned, and they've got lots of great resources online. There's another company up in Canada called Experience Point that actually has a partnership with IDEO, and they do training around design thinking. So those are the folks who really put the name on it for me. And since then, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Whether it's called human-centered design or design thinking, there are other names for it as well. And I've been practicing it now for most of my career. And I was actually a certified design thinking consultant about 15 years ago.
Cool. Sounds very good. Yeah, I'm sure it's definitely something that's, yeah, I think I learned about it back in university, actually. But I haven't actually heard that much about it since I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem, but I'm sure it's something that's going to become a lot more apparent, especially.
Salesforce is practicing it in their product design. I mean, if you look at the Lightning design, it came out of some really intense design thinking exercises at Salesforce. They're very passionate about the user experience. The big I think problem that we solve is once people get Salesforce out of the box, it's now we need to take this and tailor it to our specific industry, our specific niche, and our specific departments. And so, I was talking to the former head of the financial services cloud at Salesforce, and he said, here's the issue is we have this great package for financial services companies, but every one of them has their own unique flavor of how they work with businesses. And every department has their own unique needs. And we see Skuid as a way to be able to tailor the financial services cloud or any cloud at Salesforce for every unique business, every unique department, even down to the individual user. And that's really what human-centered is all about, right? You want to give people an application that feels like a natural extension of themselves. You don't want to force them to behave according to a data model or according to a back-end system. You want it to feel like this is an extension of me as a human being, and you want it to humanize their experience of the company. So.
Yeah, no, very true. And do you find that with human-centered design, you work with more departments than others? Because I remember one thing in my kind of consulting career is that you would always pay more attention to the sales department than the service. I mean, you still obviously want to take into account adoption, but the service people kind of had to use the system. They had to log in to get their tickets. But the sales, you don't need Sales Cloud to do sales. You can sell over the phone, obviously, but people would rather you use it. But yeah, do you see that?
Yeah, it's expanding quite rapidly. What we're seeing now, particularly in larger accounts, is that they're developing a center of excellence around this, both around human-centered design and the use of Skuid to enable human-centered design. And they're actually becoming OEMs, if you will. So a very, very large Fortune 500 company will develop this expertise around being able to crank out applications that are human-centered very, very quickly, and then they will then become a center for others across the company. And so we're seeing it expand from sales to service to distribution to overall project management to, in some cases, managing all aspects of the business. And they're becoming a group that spins out these applications and manages them very, very quickly and efficiently in ways that they just couldn't conceive of before. And so the role of the Salesforce admin, I believe in the future, this is my prediction, is that it's going to be, it's going to expand beyond the sales team because there's so much app development that needs to happen across companies, and there just aren't enough engineers to knock out that backlog. And so gaining experience with these kinds of tool sets is going to be an amazingly positive career move for folks in the future.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree with you there. Good prediction for 2021. So we're coming up to the end of our session now. So thank you very much, Ken, for all of your insights there. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, but we can give away some gifts.
No, all good. Let's do it. Let's do it. Right. So let me just. So we are giving away. Just a reminder. Very nice.
Match your background, man. You got such a festive background.
That is a mega hat. So we're just a reminder. We're giving away a Heifer from Heifer International. So that will be a gift on behalf of yourself to a family in need. And then we've got the whiskey crate, which will be delivered to your door. So both of these winners will be emailed after the session for the details. But I'm happy to announce the Heifer. Felicia Abramson, you have won the Heifer, so congratulations there. And Ken, I believe you've got the winner of the whiskey crate.
I do, yes. A Crohan, I believe is how you pronounce that name, has won the Whiskey Appreciation Crate, which will be delivered straight to your doorstep after appropriate age verifications, I'm sure.
Yes, good point. Good disclaimer.
Congratulations. Thank you all for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much, Ken, for sharing your insights with us. It's very interesting. We have the session next week with the panel with myself hosting, Lucy Mazalon, Matt Brown, and Steph Herrera on the 22nd. So sign up for that. We've still got the Bose headphones to give away. Pretty mega pair of Bose headphones, wireless, Alexa enabled, all that. So yeah, sign up, and we will see you all there in a week.
And happy holidays, everybody.
Great. Yeah, happy holidays. Thanks, guys. Cheers, Ken. Bye.